Assalamu alaikum and welcome back to another episode of Fit Sis The Podcast with myself, Jess. This is the podcast that's all about highlighting the Muslima in the arena. Each week we interview Muslima athletes operating at the highest level, all in the hopes of encouraging you at home to move more. This week my guest is Zainab Alema. She is a rugby player, Ghanaian born, brought up and born in the UK. And I am super excited to find out a little bit more about what makes her tick, inshallah. Zainab, salamu alaikum. Thank you so much for joining me.
Wa alaikum salam. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be on your podcast today, and I can't wait to get into it.
I'm really excited to have you. It is, I think I can safely say you are the only female rugby player that I know, let alone female Muslim rugby player. So that's really cool. We've had a lot of fighters on here and a basketball player, but you are our first rugby player, so welcome.
Well, thank you. Do you know what? Because I'm actually a bit surprised because obviously you're from South Africa and it's such a huge rugby nation. But I guess it depends on your circle. But yeah, I love South Africa, everything about South Africa. So yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, so it's interesting. I think, I know a lot of male rugby players, and I think the fight space lends itself to the crossover, the contact crossover between rugby and grappling, rugby and wrestling. So we see a lot of male rugby players, but yet to see a female rugby player. And if I'm honest, I think that as much as we're a rugby nation, I do think that we undervalue female rugby. And I don't know if that's probably a theme globally that we'll probably get into in a minute, but I that's probably why I'm yet to meet a female rugby player. So
Yes.
I'm really excited. Okay, so let's start at the beginning. Okay, so Ghanaian English, so Ghanaian not born, but Ghanaian genes.
Yes.
Grew up born and grew up in England. How did you find yourself in rugby?
Good question. So I sometimes ask myself that question as well because, you know, being a black Muslim woman of African descent, where do you even find rugby? So my story started back in school. So I grew up in a council estate in West London, but rugby was nowhere to be found. A lot of people played football, basketball, sort of like the main sports. But I got into it at school. And my PE teacher at the time, my physical education teacher at the time, she was a rugby fanatic. Like, she loved everything about rugby. I think she also used to coach rugby in her spare time outside of teaching. And she just brought some rugby balls into school one day and she was like, girls, we're going to do rugby today. And I remember being the only one amongst my peers that was absolutely buzzing. And I was like, okay, this is new, this is different, let's do it. Everyone else was like, oh miss, can we do something else? Like, because they understood that rugby involved physical contact, being, you know, put to the ground, and they were quite worried. But I was, on the other hand, was like, I can't wait, let's get it started. And I just remember vividly, you know, ball in hand, running through my peers, and I was just like, where's this sport been all my life? Like, it was almost like an instant connection, and I thought, yeah, this is the sport for me. This is the sport I want to get into. And that was when I was 14 years old.
That's amazing. So from a family perspective, you know, growing up as a young teenager, there's definitely an assumption that Muslim families, let alone African Muslim families, like sport generally isn't the big focus for girls. So what was that like? Was this completely different to any of the other girls in your family? And how did your family kind of take it?
It's an interesting question because I agree. Some communities, especially African communities, and you put it, also add the layer of being a Muslim woman. There's a lot of stereotypes around about sports. And I was joking with someone the other day. I was like, if I told my parents I want to become a lawyer or I want to, you know, become a doctor, there would be no question asked. But, you know, a rugby player, where do you even begin to have that conversation? I told my parents that I wanted to play rugby. So my mum, her reaction was like, I don't want my little girl to get injured. Which I think is a classic, mum response, right? And then my father, on the other hand, he was like, why do you want to play rugby? You know, rugby is for men. It's a man's sport. It's an elitist sport, you know. He just couldn't get his head around why his Muslim daughter wanted to play rugby. And he actually said, why don't you go and play tennis instead? And I was thinking, tennis is not my thing. But when I think
It's not
about
the same thing.
same thing, like it's totally like opposite. But I think maybe there's a lot to be said about representation, because I think at the time, Serena Williams being a black female in the tennis world, she was really like flying the flag, and I think maybe he thought, oh, maybe that's something that you could pursue. But rugby was just not on the cards, but he never said no. My father never said no. He just couldn't understand it. Because he didn't say no, I just carried on, and now he tells everyone that I play rugby, and I'm like, his tune has
I love
changed.
that. I love that. And I think it's, one of the things, like my daughter, for example, she's a very competitive acrobat.
Nice.
It's not the sport I would have chosen for her. She kind of fell into it, and generally kids want to do like the complete opposite to their parents. So like if my daughter came and was like, "Mom, I want to be a professional fighter, I want to be a BJJ athlete," I would have been, "Yeah, absolutely, let's do that." But this acro thing was supposed to be a little hobby on the side, and she's taking it really seriously. And
Nice.
the thing is, I think if you can get an adolescent, girl or boy, into sport and distracted with sport, doesn't matter what the sport is. Just the fact that they're in it is just, it shapes you in such a different way. It's something that I didn't have growing up. I was doing all kinds of other things and found sport so much later in life. So you found rugby at 14, and then what does the rest of high school look like for you?
The rest of high school, I actually took a break from it. So we did it for a term. So that was my found love. But I was still interested in sports. I participated in all the sports day, etc. over the years. And then I came back into contact with rugby when I was 17 years old, because I was studying an A-level in physical education. And at the time, my teacher was like, you need to do a physical component to add to your theory. And I thought, she asked me, what sport do you want to do? And I was like, do you know what? I think I want to do rugby, because I remember, rewind a couple of years ago, I really enjoyed the session. So she literally went out of her way to get me into my first rugby club down in West London. It's called Ealing Childfinders. And she drove me literally from school to the rugby club in her white Nissan Micra car. And I just think she went above and beyond for me, because she could have easily said, do football instead, do rounders, do tennis. She could have said any other sport that they knew that the school provided, but the school didn't provide rugby. So she actually spoke to the head teacher and got me my first paid membership for a year at my first rugby club. So like every time I do something in rugby, I just think back to that teacher, and actually the first teacher as well that got me into it. I just think if it wasn't for those two, and the fact that they were both women as well, like it's incredible. And they always saying, they're really proud of me, and I always make sure I keep in touch with them. So yeah, like I'm really, really grateful for those two women.
That's so amazing, SubhanAllah, to hear that. I think the story of teachers that make such a big impact on, young people's lives is almost like kind of left for the movies. You don't hear about it that often. I can tell you plenty of stories of teachers that left trauma in my life by unintentionally making me feel silly for not being able to answer the math question or whatever. That sits with you. But I find that those stories of teachers that really go above and beyond and make they're so profound but so rare, unfortunately. But it's beautiful that you got the opportunity to have that twice, which is great.
Yes, yeah, honestly, like I owe a lot to them, honestly, alhamdulillah.
So what was it like breaking into the rugby space? Did you feel like there were any extra challenges? Obviously, you had to navigate your family and I guess some community stuff. But, the layers that you have being a Black Muslim woman, what was it like navigating that space?
It was difficult, to be honest with you. I won't sugarcoat it. I think in the beginning, when I first started, I didn't really take notice of the rugby community or the rugby culture. I was just playing the sport that I loved. But the moment it became more apparent and I started taking notice of my surroundings and actually realising that I'm really different was when I went to university. And that was because rugby in general, I think a lot of people agree with me, they have quite a heavy alcohol drinking culture within rugby. And being a Muslim woman, just starting out university, I was sort of not thrown in, but I knew I wanted to play rugby at university level, so I joined a club. But I noticed like a lot of it, like if they had socials, they were like, oh, after a game, we're going to go to the bar and have some pints, or we're going to go to the club. We're going to, like, a lot of the lifestyle that was attached to the rugby social circle, it wasn't something that I was naturally involved in. So I found it really difficult to sort of navigate that. But I think a lot of it came from maybe I was 20, I'd say about 18 to 21, I was really sort of that soul searching. I was having that soul searching time where like, I need to figure out what I stand for. I sound born Muslim, but I need to figure out Islam for myself, and then hopefully that will help me navigate any space I fall into. Towards the end of my time in university, I just remember being a bit more confident with being a Muslim woman, but it was challenging. So I didn't go to any socials, so I was really trying to figure out how can I relate to my teammates off the pitch. Dressing, I would wear my underlayers under my kit, so I knew as soon as you look at me I look different. On top of that, I was the only black girl on my team for a number of years. I think it wasn't until like halfway through my last season or like my second season, there was another black girl that came onto the team. So it kept on playing on my mind, like, is this sport for me? Do I belong in this sport? Because I look left, I look right, I don't see anyone that look like me. But I just knew I loved the sport. That's the one thing that I was certain about. So I held on, and I think there's actually two things that kept me in the sport, because I think after I finished university, I had to make a choice. I'm now an adult, I've qualified as a nurse. Do I still want rugby in my life or do I not? And so the two things that kept me in the sport was the fact that in the laws of rugby, I was allowed to wear a hijab. And prior to that, I had no knowledge about whether I was or wasn't. I was just covering my hair anyway. So that was sort of like rugby giving me a warm hug, like you belong, like, you don't see people around, but in the law book you can wear a head covering for religious reasons. That was one. And secondly, presentation I think is so important, because I remember at the time where I was struggling to find, my feet and belonging in rugby. There's this one woman, her name is Maggie Alfonsi, and she was playing for the Red Roses, which is the English national team, and she was a black woman, and I just thought, oh my goodness, like, I never knew she existed, but until I saw her, I was like, she's a black woman like I am. She's playing rugby at an elite level. If she can play rugby, why can't I play rugby? So I was backed up with the fact that black women can play rugby, and on top of that, I can wear my hijab to play rugby. And I was like, do you know what, Z? Just stay in the sport, go with it, and see where it goes. So I'm happy I did stick around.
It's beautiful. Do you feel like it comes with this added, like once you figure it out, right? Once you figure out that like, yes, I belong, but yes, there's going to be an added pressure on me that I need to represent. Like I'm representing black women in rugby. I'm representing Muslim women in rugby. Like it can be a lot. Does that pressure ever feel like a lot on your shoulders?
Not really, because I think when I do sit and think about it, that's actually quite a lot of layers to me, and there's a lot of people that may can relate to me on different levels, whether it's the fact that I'm a female, I'm black, I'm Muslim, etc. But I just bring it back to the fact that I'm just me, and I want to do me. If you can take something from my lifestyle or something from the way I speak, etc., I'm happy, but I don't want to be responsible for any group. If I can inspire you, I'm happy, but I don't think I feel much pressure, to be honest with you, because I focus on myself. But if I happen to inspire you along the way, that is something that I would love to do, but I don't put too much pressure on myself in that instinct. As long as I'm the best version of myself, I think that's the most important thing to me.
So you mentioned, struggling to relate struggling to bond or relate potentially in the beginning with teammates. And that's something that's quite foreign to me in my sport. We belong to a gym, but it's your solo, right? So nobody needs to like you. You don't need to like anybody necessarily. But obviously when you're playing a team sport, there's a level of camaraderie and a bond. And my husband played relatively high level rugby as well. And he speaks about this as a born Muslim in rugby in South Africa being very much a drinking culture. And I think university in most countries, being a big drinking space. And so without that, when you're not in that indulgent alcohol space, that it can be difficult. So how did you break through that and actually form those bonds with your teammates?
I think I had to say to myself, I'm a Muslim woman within rugby. I need to stay true to my values. That's the most important thing. Because once I got that bit right, everything else became a bit more easier, in the sense that I didn't feel pressure to drink alcohol. I didn't feel pressure to partake in activities that I knew wasn't aligned with me. So, for example, let's say we're, after school, after the game, and they want to have a pint at the bar, I'd order an orange juice, for example. I'm a big tea drinker, by the way, and maybe it's because, I'm British, but I love a good Earl Grey tea. So that's, another choice of drink that I can order. But I do remember one particular time during my last season at university. So we do this thing in rugby where after you play, there are 2 nominations from each team of player of the match. So whoever played the best in each team, they have to stand in front of everybody and they down a pint of, it could be Guinness, whatever, some sort of alcoholic drink. And obviously being Muslim, like I used to reject that. But there was one occasion where I think my teammates clocked on, like, this girl is not about this kind of life, you know, she doesn't drink. And they gave me an alternative drink. So I think I had, it was lemonade, I think it was, yeah. So they gave me a pint of lemonade. So I just downed that, and obviously I won because I wasn't going to lose. But it was a way they allowed me to feel included without compromising my values. And like that was so many years ago, but I still remember it today because it was something so little but made an incredible impact that I didn't feel isolated. I was still able to feel like part of the team, but not compromising my faith. So that was a beautiful moment that I still remember to this day. So little things like this, I feel like it's really important for people to know. What are the alternatives you can do for Muslim women within spaces for them to feel comfortable? How can you accommodate them and make them feel like, yes, we don't practice the same religion, etc., but you're still one of us and you're still part of our team.
So I love that, and it makes me think every now and again you see a footage that comes out of some kind of team game. Often, mostly it's football, where there'll be like one hijabi athlete, on the team, and her scarf slips, and then there's a viral video. I don't even know what, but all the other ladies kind of make a circle around her and put her scarf back on. And I feel like those beautiful moments, every hijabi athlete. But it happens outside of the athletic space. But I've got them in my gym as well, where there's like one or two ladies that when the scarf slips, and they're not Muslim, but they're these amazing allies, and they come and they just kind of like, fix your crown for you. So once you've broken those barriers and you're able to, to make those connections with people, then you find that I think what I hear from what you're saying is it's two things. It's one, it starts with yourself. So being sure of who you are and being proud of who you are, that shines through. And then the second part is once you've forged those relationships, and they can be amazing kind of allies in your life. Have you had any, I know that you wear a scrum cap, but have you had any kind of hijab malfunction issues that you've needed some
Oh yeah, absolutely. So
assistance with?
before I got this scrum cap, when I was playing rugby, I didn't have a sports hijab. I don't think I even knew sports hijab existed. I was just sort of covering my hair. So during the game, I was playing on the wing, and I actually ran down pretty much the length of the field and scored a try. And I remember getting up, and my teammates weren't like cheering or like happy that I scored. And I was like, "What's going on? Like, I just scored for the team. Like, you're not happy for me?" And I could just see the expressions of their face. I think, what are they looking at? And then I felt the wind in my hair and in my scalp, and I was like, oh my goodness, my headscarf had come off. And it came off like 20 meters, away, but I just didn't notice because I was, adrenaline, I was in the moment. And then, I obviously got up and they're like, are you okay? Like, they seemed really worried and concerned. And I obviously wasn't hurt because I didn't injure myself, but I think it was a bit of an awkward moment because they didn't know what to do. And they hadn't seen my hair as well, so they were like, "Oh, what do we do in this situation?" But I just went to go and pick up my hijab, put it back on my head, and then we just cracked on and carried on playing. So I love the fact that they showed concern. I love the fact that they came to ask me how I was doing, if I was okay. But then that triggered for me to find a hack. Like I just thought this can't keep happening. And my hair was in a state, so to make it even worse. So I was like, I need to find a hack, a way to keep my hijab on my head but still fully be able to engage in the rugby activities. And that's where obviously I invested in a scrum cap and also a sports hijab, and since then I've not had any hijab malfunctions, alhamdulillah.
Amazing. And I mean that's obviously most competitive, most athlete, most active Muslim woman, that's the biggest fear, right? Is, anything out of like weight training, there's this fear that when there's contact, your hijab's going to slip. Certainly in the fight space, it's the same. I know we've chatted offline about this as well. And with one of the other guests, she had it happen in a jiu-jitsu competition. It's when that hijab comes off, it's not only that you've now exposed yourself, but it's that you look pretty ridiculous too, because your hair is generally like standing in all kinds of directions, and it's just not a good look, right? Did you have any of the like halal police, so to speak, come after you or something like that, in terms of it being a reinforcement that like, this is why Muslim women shouldn't do this?
So at the time, I was still sort of in my early days of rugby. So at that time, I don't think I really, social media wasn't really like what it is today. So I didn't have any sort of haram police, so to speak. But I think just in general, being in this space, you're going to get people who are not happy with what you're doing, especially as a Muslim woman, especially somebody that's out on social media and sharing my experiences through rugby. But I would say the majority have been great. I think the only, because some people ask me, have I ever experienced Islamophobia or like racism, etc. And when I think about it from my rugby career, in terms of like in your face, I can say hand on heart, I haven't experienced anything. But I think the age of social media, where anyone can get access to internet and there's trolls and there's keyboard warriors, it's really difficult to prevent that. So I would say my most recent time where I experienced a lot of backlash or a lot of criticism was when I actually went to the Rugby World Cup 2023 and I presented the match ball. It was actually England and South Africa who were playing in the semi-finals, and I think it was quarterfinals actually. Me thinking this is an incredible opportunity for me. I'm hijab, I'm a black woman. I'm going on the biggest rugby stage, and I'm presenting the match ball against two giants of rugby. And then when you go online, the comments are still there. You can check yourself. Like things I can't even say. Some of the comments I had to delete because I just thought, there's no way I'm going to leave this on my page, but just nasty comments. And for me, it fuels me. For me, I don't get bothered by these things because I just think I know myself. I know why I'm doing this. And actually, whatever hate you have is actually more reflection on the person who's giving the hate rather than yourself. So you have to grow thick skin, So those kind of things fuel me because it actually makes me understand why I have to keep on showing up and representing myself and other female rugby players.
Yeah, it's tough. I can imagine on a big stage like that, just how bad it got, because ultimately, like, the people that are rugby doesn't have, it's like fighting. We don't have the most educated, pristine fans, right? Like people that are like, you're sitting there with your big fat belly and your beer in your hand shouting at the TV screen. It's that kind of person, right? And so what helps me is just imagining what that troll looked like and what kind of person they are, which has always helped me kind of just feel a little bit better about, look, I'm still in the arena, I'm still doing something that's profound, and I know what the reasons are that I'm there. So it's beautiful to hear that you've allowed that to fuel you. What advice would you give to other young female athletes, Muslim athletes, or just women in the sports space that have to deal with that kind of backlash in terms of getting through it and allowing it not to impact them too much?
Yeah, I think it's just going back to yourself as a person and remembering why you're entering the space, why you're doing whatever activity you're doing, and don't let their words impact you, because then it's almost as if you're giving them the power. But you have to keep the power for yourself, and in doing so you just sort of shut it out and just stay focused on whatever goal you're trying to achieve or whatever space you're in, because you're there for a reason. Like I said just now, it's more of a reflection on their character and them as a person rather than you. And we're all Muslims, here in the space, as in you and I and maybe a lot of your followers. We obviously answer to Allah and we have our religion to guide us. Any random troll, messaging you, like, why give them your energy? Why give them your time? So I think just bringing it back to yourself and knowing that you don't have to answer to them. You've got a higher being that is more important for you to focus on rather than the trolls.
I love that. So we've mentioned hijab a couple of times. Did you have a hijab journey in terms of coming to wear hijab, and how did that kind of coincide with your rugby career? Like, were you always in hijab playing rugby, or how did that kind of work out for you?
Yeah, I think throughout school I was on and off. I feel like my hijab journey became a bit more profound when I left secondary college, I would say. So when I was going, it was almost the same time I was taking rugby a bit more seriously or loving rugby a bit more, and that's when I was doing a bit more research about Islam and sort of trying to be a bit more modest in terms of what I wear. And I think it came at a perfect time, actually, and I think it's what I needed at the time. But throughout my years, I would say, well, when I was in college, I was studying religious education as well. So I was always chatting to my friends and family about religion, etc. And I almost felt like I had to ask myself, I remember I got into it with somebody, and they were of Christian faith, a guy that we was going back and forth about religion, but in a nice way, not in a horrible way. And he asked me, "Are you Muslim? Like, you don't cover, etc." And I thought, oh my God, this is like a non-Muslim asking me that. And I just thought, this is like, it's almost like indirectly, I kind of felt like it was a wake-up call. And I think
Yeah.
from then I started to be a bit more like aware of how I'm presenting myself. And literally, I think about 2 days after that sort of altercation, I came to school, in the hijab, and I was really nervous. I was really, really nervous because I thought, what would people think? But I remember one of my teachers was like, "You look really beautiful." I would always cry, I was like, "Oh my God!" Like
Oh.
you're inside, you're thinking, you're worried. People are gonna, judge you. People are gonna
Mm.
not want to be your friend, and then a teacher to say you look beautiful. I just thought, you're my favorite teacher now. It was such a lovely thing
It's
to say, especially when inside you're like your blood is just boiling, your heart rate is
yeah.
going.
It's such a, so you've mentioned so many things, and I think the first one that you mentioned around, being asked, "Are you Muslim?" I relate to that so much because I went through my own hijab journey as a revert, but still, realizing that I think in both our cases, being a black woman and for myself being a white woman in South Africa, we don't have that many. Well, it would be easy to not know whether a black woman, if she was Muslim or not. Same with a white woman, right? So in South Africa, we've got more Indians and Malays, and there you kind of just assume that they're Muslim, even if they're
Yeah.
not in hijab. And for me, it was the same thing where for years I wasn't in hijab, but I was trying to be a good role model and trying to be representing my religion, often mentioning it. And after a fight, I'm saying, Alhamdulillah. So like, I thought I was doing a good job, but then realizing that there was one, big piece that was missing for me. And so for me, a big kind of profound moment would be we would walk in a shopping center and there'd be like another Muslim family that would kind of pass us. And, I would say salam alaikum, or my husband would say, we're just greeting. But they wouldn't always greet back, right? Because he's not in a thobe, I'm not in a hijab. So they were probably like, who are these crazy white people? Like, just saying salam alaikum the whole time. Um, and so I realized that in terms of the family unit, like it stops with me. I'm the one that needs to represent this family as a Muslim family, let alone the sport and, who I am on social media and all of that. And that was my big aha moment. So now if we walk in the shopping center, they'll greet my husband, salam alaikum, but he doesn't look like a Muslim. The only reason they know he's Muslim is because
Because of
I'm
you,
wearing hijab.
yeah,
So I'm like,
yeah, I
yeah.
get. That's so cool. I love that.
I love it. So we've chatted about your hijab journey. We've chatted about your kind of your sporting career and the trolls, so to speak, that you've dealt with. The other kind of big thing for me with Muslim women and how they approach the sporting space would be around losses and experiencing losses, and I guess to a degree experiencing victories as well. Do you kind of think that you navigate either of those maybe differently because of your faith?
Yeah, definitely. I do think so. Like, I do try to have a routine on match days and game days. I mean, in general, as much as I love rugby and it's, part of who I am, I think I've got a good sense of separating rugby and other parts of my life. Because I think I was actually speaking to someone about this the other day, and talking about sport and how sometimes it becomes somebody's whole identity. So if something
Yeah.
goes wrong, let's say they lose a match or they lose a game, etc., it really brings them down because they almost feel worthless or they feel like a failure because every part of their being is centered around the sport. But alhamdulillah, I feel like as Muslims as well, and as members of a family unit, we've got it good in the sense that we know there's a bigger picture and there's a bigger purpose and there's a bigger cause. So if, let's say, you do have a loss, there's other ways to count your blessings, if you like. And I think
Mm.
our dean teaches us to be grateful for every single blessing, things that we don't even think of, like the ability to breathe without even thinking, to be able to walk and etc. So I think when you have gratitude, become a bit more, how do I say it? You're able to cope with it a bit more because you're grateful for maybe your other wins, or you're grateful for the fact that you're not in hospital after a match. So
Yeah.
for me, like, even just making dua before I step on the pitch, before I play, it centers me, and like whatever happens, I want Allah to protect me, and either way, I'm just grateful for being on this pitch and be able to play a sport that I love.
I love that. So you mentioned hospitalization. So I have a question like around any injuries that you've picked up and how you've managed those. But then when I put it out last week and I asked my Instagram community if there were any questions specifically that they wanted to ask you, one came through saying, "Aren't you worried about head trauma?" And it was such a profound question for me because it didn't even, as somebody in contact sports, like it's not even something that crosses my mind, right?
Really?
Because I do, me and you, we do the same
Yeah,
things to our bodies.
yeah.
So, so maybe just touching on both of those things in terms of injuries that you've sustained, so I will say this. To me, if I have to choose between fighting and rugby, for me, fighting feels a lot safer. Personally, you probably feel the opposite, right? But there's a thing for me around fighting where it's like I'm in the cage and I can see my opponent and anything can happen. I've picked up some wild injuries, but at least I know where they're coming from. The thing that freaks me out about rugby, not even so much as the head trauma, but it's the fact that somebody can come at you from behind and from any angle and multiple people. So that's my reservation around rugby. So tell me a little bit more, like how have you navigated some of your injuries if you've picked them up, and aren't you worried about head trauma?
Yeah, that's a really valid question and a very topical question. It's something that is always talked about, and I think the game is evolving and becoming more faster. And I think it's something that everyone's always talking about within the rugby space, to be honest with you. And there's a lot of technology, like in terms of like gum shields and scrum caps, trying to monitor the forces and impact to prevent concussion or to see how one can get concussed. But I think for me, I don't think about it, to be honest with you. Like, I think it's something that I kind of related to risk. There's always risk in everything you do. Like, even if you're not been playing sport, crossing the road is a risk. You can get knocked over, etc. But I understand a lot of people think, but you're choosing to put yourself in this, I guess, risky environment. A lot is to be said about technique. Having the right technique, knowing what your strengths are, making sure you're skilled at what you do. But obviously in a rugby pitch, like you said, anything can happen. But for me, so in terms of injuries, alhamdulillah, I haven't had any major injuries in my years of playing. I mean, I've broken a few fingers, dislocated a few fingers, come out with bruises and scratches as you do, but I haven't actually had any really, really injuries that required me to be hospitalised, alhamdulillah. So yeah, that's sort of me. But I do get where people are coming from. I obviously wear a scrum cap. There's one that I actually am starting to wear more recently, and a lot of research is going into behind the makeup of the actual scrum cap, what they can do to monitor the impacts that players face when they get into contact. And I love that people are having these conversations, because I know on the other side of the world, especially when you talk about American football, there's a lot of like documentaries and movies that have come out about the long-term impact of head injuries, which sounds very scary, especially as a mum, and as a person in general, full stop. But for me, it's not something that I take lightly, but also it doesn't consume my thoughts. As long as I try to go into the game using the right technique, and I'm trusting that the opposition is also using the right technique, we can lessen sort of the traumatic injuries. But yeah, it's a very valid question. You cannot 100% prevent yourself from concussion. It will happen and it can happen, but I think making sure you're best equipped to deal with it before, and I guess also after it happens.
Yeah, for sure. So you mentioned being a mom, and definitely the kind of the biggest motivation for me around starting this podcast has been to highlight Muslim female athletes kind of operating at the highest level that they can in sport, with the aim of inspiring other Muslim women just to move more. And one of the kind of excuses, and I don't say that lightly because it's valid, but one of the excuses that a lot of Muslim women have is that once they become moms, their lives are busy, they're looking after their family, they can't find time for a workout, and as a result, they don't prioritize their health and their fitness. So firstly, how do you balance it all? And secondly, what would your advice or motivation be to those women who are struggling to carve out time for themselves just to get some exercise in?
I think balancing is very difficult, very, very difficult. I'm sure you agree, and a lot of mums that are in like sports agree. Firstly, childcare is difficult. Navigating that if you don't have family members or you can't afford childcare, it's very difficult to play elite sport. But if we bring it down to like your average person who's had a baby, you know, I feel like there's pockets of time that you could even. I think people really underestimate walking. Let's say you're going somewhere and you know it's a couple of bus stops away. Just walk and don't take the bus, or get up a few stops early, get those steps in. And I think you don't have to be in the gym and be a gym rat and be, you know, lifting weights left, right and centre. Start really small and build your way up. But if walking is the only exercise you can do, firstly it's free and you can go out, you know, you can just go out and get it done. So even if you want to take your child out, your baby out for a little stroll, depending on the weather, or even if you can't, if you're confined to your home and you can't get out, whack on a YouTube video and do a body exercise with no weights. You know, there's a lot of different ways you can get an active lifestyle in. For me, I remember I'll probably the opposite. Like I feel like I have to be physically active in order to pour into my children, in order to become a good mum, or active mum if you like, or present mum, I think probably is the best word. So I remember, for example, after I had my third child, obviously I've had like 2 kids by then, and I'm like, this is my third one. People were thinking, people always ask me, are you still playing rugby? Are you going to go back into rugby? And I'm like,
Yeah.
I mean, especially after the third one, I've got to, you know, by now. And I remember going to county trials. So this is like the best in your county. You go there, you trial. If you make it, you represent your county. And I remember taking she was 8 weeks old, so I'd just given birth 8 weeks. I turned up at the county trials, which probably, looking back, it probably wasn't the best thing to do because maybe my body wasn't fully healed around that time. But I got to a space where I kind of felt like I was losing myself. Like, where is Z? Like, where's Zainab the rugby player? Like, you know, motherhood consumed me. It became everything about feeding and changing nappies, etc. that I almost lost myself in the process. And rugby was that one thing that made me really like almost bring home to the Zainab before kids. And I remember I rocked up and I did really badly because I was not fit, I was not ready, but I went. And I remember my baby in a car seat in the middle of the changing rooms, and people looking like, a lot of the players were like, whose baby is that? Like, why is there a baby here? But I didn't care. I was just there to sort of like get out of that mental space. And I said to myself, when I'm fit and I'm ready, I'm going to come back. And the year after, I trialled again and I managed to get in. So I was like, I had to prove myself that I was good enough to get there, and I did. And actually, there's people that remember that day and they've seen my journey and they're like, we remember when you came with your baby, your 2-month-old baby, and look at you now, like you're thriving, alhamdulillah, and you're really enjoying your rugby. So in those moments, you don't realise how much of an impact you're making in other people's lives, but it's such a blessing to be able to do that.
Yeah, inspiring those around you, but also your kids who are looking on and going like, my mom is a badass.
Yeah, I love that. They do.
I know we've run out of time. Sorry, say it again.
No, I'm just saying they do love the fact that I play rugby, yeah.
Yeah, it's very cool. I think for kids to be able to grow up and see that their mom is, you know, active, it's such a massive example. And whether it's, you know, at a high level from a sports perspective, or whether it's just, you know, prioritizing your health, I think it's this underrated example that you set for your kids, where if you don't show them that healthy lifestyle, they end up raising a family that isn't healthy either. So we're fixing generational stuff here,
Yeah, I love
which is
that.
amazing.
Yeah.
So I could speak to you for another hour, but we have run out of time in my bid to keep these podcasts short and exciting for people to watch.
Yes.
So thank you so much for joining me today. I really, really appreciate it. And hopefully we can do a part 2 sometime.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure. And keep doing what you're doing. I'm in awe and I'm a big fan of you. Alhamdulillah.
Oh, back at you. All right, Zainab, thank you so much. Assalamu alaikum.
Alaikum salam.